Hello from Komotion and welcome to our daily randoms. My name is Alex and today I will be demonstrating how to rig and animate non-parametric chains for a simple model to grow. After this guide, I hope that you'll be able to take away some tips and tricks to be able to come up with another animation type that could be a little bit more sophisticated, just like this tree shown here. Firstly, let's create a random list. So I'm going to select my model, I'm going to go on to Scene Object List panel, I'm going to press Add to List. This has now been added to a random list, and if I start clicking buttons on here, you'll see that it will do particular things. Next, I'm going to add two layers. My first layer, I'm going to call Model. My second layer, I'm going to call Komotion. Next, you'll want to select your model and add it to the model layer. I'm going to make my model X-rayed. So now I can see through it. And I'm going to set this model up as a reference. So now it's see-through and I can't select it. Let's make our first chain. I'm going to go to the Skeleton Creation panel. I'm going to click New. And I'm going to call it Plant. And I'm going to add a chain. I'm going to call this Stem. Now for this chain, I'm going to tick a few features. So firstly, I'm going to click Stretch Type, which will set the chain's curve objects to use a non-parametric stretch. I'm going to set Base Bone. This will stop the first chain segment from following any chain IK movement, just like a spine would when you need a pelvis. Next, let's add some corrective joints. Corrective joints are quick and easy. It's a feature which will reduce the need for corrective blend shapes and lessens the time required for skinning by adding in some extra joints. Next, I'm going to add some chain twists. This adds a wrist twist-like mechanic to chains, giving an automatic and more organic twist deformation. However, this is not to be confused with the animation control called Twist, which is a manual user control. Let's create a chain. So I'm going to go to the controller number and I'm going to make 6 controllers. I'm going to have 2 bones per controller segment. So now you'll see we have a chain. When editing your chains, you may wish to change the sizes of your bones and controllers. There are more options here, which will be covered later. So for the bones, I'm going to set mine to 2. And for the controller, I'm going to set these to 2 as well. So now you'll see these controllers are bigger. Controller sizing is quite useful, especially when you're scaling objects up and down or making them thicker, because sometimes controllers can be hidden by the mesh when it has been scaled, which you would want to then resize your controller. Controller sizing isn't animated. Next, let's edit our chain. I'm just going to close the Skeleton Creation panel and I'm going to open up the Animation and Kinematics controls. And I'm going to first go to Root. So if you click on Root and then select a controller from your chain, you'll see that it will go to the bottom of your chain. This allows you to move entire chains around even when they're in structures. However, this one is perfectly at the base of this model, so the root does not need to be moved. Next, I'm going to be editing the FK controllers. So if I press the IK and FK control, this will give me access to the FK controls. FK means that you can just rotate controls around and you can move them around as well. On these controls, FK controls have had their scale locked, so I do not recommend trying to scale these. So firstly, let's select one, and I'm going to go to the Core System and Select controls, and I'm going to do Select Chain. Now this will select all the FK controls. I'm just going to move these down and get it roughly to how long this is. Sometimes you'll want to change your chain without affecting the rest of the chain. In this case, you would use the free FK control. And so when I grab all these controllers again, I can now move them around freely without affecting the rest of the hierarchy. I'm just going to put snap to vertex. I'm just going to move these to where I'd like them. Now that I have my main controls in place, I'm going to go on to a more advanced control in the Splines control panel. I'm going to click Path Objects. Path Objects. This allows the user to move bones up and down a chain without affecting the initial chain's position. If you're unsure about having the correct node selected, look for the path node prefix path in its name. So right now I have a path X selected. If I reselect, you'll see now I have a path selected. This is not to be confused. Path X is a child node of this controller. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to adjust these controls so that the bones generally match up with particular edge loops. Before we start, as a rule of thumb, look at your bone count in between your controllers. If you have 2 for 6 controllers like I do on my chain, when you're editing these bones, you'll want to keep them between these controllers so that you can keep to a methodical workflow and to make animation easier later on down the line. So you'll see me flip back and forth between these until I am satisfied. When editing bones, you'll want to try and make one bone that will be used as a parent and get it in line with another straight bit of mesh that will be used to make another chain to go along on, so that when it comes to making this particular section grow, you won't get any tricky skinning problems and that the skinning will be quite methodical. So now I've got the chain to a standard that I like. I'm going to go ahead and press Freeze Rig Transforms. However, before I press this button, let's give a little tip. So when I was doing IK and FK, the reasons why I went back to check what count this had for the bones per controllers was that when you set up your bones, you'll always want the bones between their chosen segment and have the first bone generally on its first controller. This is because when you do a freeze rig transforms, it uses the first bone to help with its mathematical calculations, and that is basically it. So now I'm going to press freeze rig transforms. So you usually get a little yellow kind of message down here. However, just ignore it because it's just Maya giving you some more irrelevant information. So why did I press freeze rig transforms? Generally I will press the freeze rig transform button when I've got to a point where I am happy with my current structure edits. This is a very useful option that you will often use during structure creation processes. It sorts out gimbal lock issues which appear when you have been freely positioning chain segments. It will also fix matrix issues, which is to do with mirroring, and this can happen during linking of chains. And finally, it creates a freeze state for that current rig whenever this button is pressed. Freeze states are used by the reset button feature, which is another amazing feature within the toolset. And just to demonstrate what reset does, I'm just going to grab a controller, I'll bring it over here, and I'm going to press the button reset. And now you'll see that it's been reset to its frozen state. And this can be used for every single controller inside of a chain. So no matter what control you've used, generally if you press reset, it will reset to that controller, unless it is a spline, which then you would do realign paths when you have either one of them selected or the actual spline curve selected, which will then actually reset all of them. Now let's create some chart chains. We'll be using the select and create method found within the Komotion toolset. This method for linking is not a button, and it is done visually. It's the most basic type of linking found within the Komotion toolset, and it makes life easy when making structures. I'm going to add a chain. I'm going to put it in the left direction, and I'm going to leave the mirror neutral because, as you can see, there is no opposite branch to mirror. And I'm just going to change the color, and let's call it branch. Next, I'm going to select a component from my chain. So if your chain does not look like it does currently now, and it could be in IK and FK, you can use these controllers. However, it may not link entirely correctly to how you think it will. Just to be safe, go down to Path Joints and click the button. Now select one of the path joints, and now increase your controller number. As you can see, a new chain has been created, and if I move this around, you'll see that it's been linked. And all I did was I selected a component from the chain, which was a path X, and then I just did create, which is why it's called the select and create method. From here, I'm just going to be editing this chain again, just like I did on this chain, except that it's going to be horizontal for this branch. And finally, I'm going to set up the features, which are inside of the configuration section of the chain, to the exact same configuration I did for the branch. In this tutorial, every single chain will contain these ticked features. Just to make things simple, I will be having one controller here, one controller here, and one controller here. For editing, you'll just want to go through and use the exact same controllers that have previously been demonstrated to achieve your chain. So I've done select chain on the IK system, which currently is an FK, so I've selected the FKs. I'm just moving this around. I'm just going to select the root because I want it to be positioned away from the actual main chain, preferably on the starting vertex of the growth, which looks like it's here. Free FK can also be used with the root. Now I have my main controllers in the correct positions, and now I'm going to go through and I'm going to edit the path objects. Now that I'm happy with my chain, I'm going to add some more chains. I'm going to simply select this component again, which is a path, and I'm going to do up, neutral, I'm going to make it orange. As a shortcut, just press root when you have any component selected, and it'll just select your root, and then go back onto IK, and now you've selected the bottom IK. Just a quick tip for moving around quickly. So now I'm generally happy with my rig structure. I'm going to show how to do skinning with the tool, which is currently a prototype at the moment. So if you go into the skeleton creation panel, you'll see that there's a size called skin. Now if we go down to the utility controls and press show skins, you'll see there's a bunch of tubes that appear. These are the paths of the Komotion chains, and they have two uses. One, these are quite useful for visualizing animations when you don't have a model, but two, they're also a good start to skin wrapping. So as an example, I will go onto the stem and I'll just increase the size of the skin. And you can do these for all of the chains. So go to skinning and then select the base of the structure, which means that when it comes to collecting from the selection, which will be this structure, it will collect every single bone and joint. However, if you select the blue rings at the end of a chain and do collect, you'll see that less bones will be collected because it's only collected that particular chain. And so you can specify what you need collected for skinning. Next, you'll want to select your model, which is the affected target. And once you have both lists filled with what you need, do apply skin. And now let's see how this has turned out. And from here, you can just start going in and start painting your weights. Now we're going to take a look at the skin. So this has been automated, it was just done with what was being shown. And when I bend this, you'll see that there's a slight weird dip. Now, this isn't actually incorrectly skinned. This is due to a subset of controllers that are not being moved due to the fact that of the chain type that we've created. If you wanted to see an instant perfect skin, we would have had curve type also ticked for our chains. But for this video we haven't, so that we can demonstrate what this is. So I'm going to go down to an advanced control, spline controls, and go to path joint, and I'm going to select one, and you'll see the word or prefix path X, and I'm going to move it. Now you'll see when I move them, it actually is nicely skinned. This is because the ribbons are currently straight. If we had used the curve type to set it to Bezier, then all the ribbons would have naturally bended in between our controller sections. So this is probably something you'll want to try out again using this tutorial, but next time you'll want to actually make the curve type a Bezier one by ticking this. Now when looking at the skin, you'll probably select on the FK controller found in the IK control set, and you'll be moving this around thinking, well, this doesn't look nicely skinned. And that's actually deliberate in this case, because you need to have it perfectly cut off from the actual stem itself. If you see this kind of movement here, then you're going to have to experiment around whether you like having that or not. As me personally, I don't like that, so I'd go in and I'd just quickly change the weight so that that is actually attached to the stem. The reason why this is cut off so bluntly is because if I go into thickness, you need to be able to scale this so that this area closes up. So when I set this to 0.001 and 0.001, it needs to look like that it's vanished. But as you can see, because of these extra points here that have been caught, this has also been brought in, causing an artifact, which means that these need to be skinned to the main stem again, so that then you get a nice round flat cut off. And then later on when we're animating, because all of this will go inwards, it will then become flat. Usually the skinning doesn't quite get the end point, so there's some fiddling about with these, but the rest of these should perfectly align usually into a nice flat surface. Now let's do some range of motion. I'm going to show you how to squash a branch and the controls that I use, and then from there you can kind of just work out your own range of motions. So I'm going to go to stem, I'm going to select a path object. Before you do this, just make sure path joints or path objects is on and select one, and then you're going to do select chain. Now that we've selected all the path objects of that chain, I'm going to go to frame 50, it's going to set them all to 0, and I would have squashed it, and if you look in, it's nice and flat. From here you can go on to thickness later on when you're animating, and this will literally vanish, giving the effect of a growing plant when it comes out of, say, a seed. I'm going to go to frame 70 and I'm just going to realign them, and now we have a nice growing effect. I'm going to press a key, because when you press realign it doesn't set a key on the path objects, and so you just set a key as like a marker for these objects to let you know that there has been some kind of animation put on them, because these can also be moved around when you're in path joints. Okay, so I'm just going to go to set up these branches. You don't need to make them bend or anything, because when it goes flat it means that you know that the skinning is generally perfect on the actual branch itself. And just as a tip, these pointy bits are actually bones, and this is caused by a visual issue to do with Maya, which we are still yet to figure out with our system. So now you should have a range of motions that you are satisfied with. Next we're going to set up a starting loop range of motions just for the thickness of the branch, so that we make a nice cutoff when it comes to just slightly tweaking vertex weights on the first loop to allow this to go flat and to vanish correctly when required. So on my one I'm going to go to frame 80. I'm going to go and select a node and press thickness. You can press thickness beforehand and just go in and select. I'm just going to set a key. I'm just going to set a key on 70 just to be sure. Then go on to 90. I'm going to set the scale of this to 0.001 and 0.001, and then on 100 I'm just going to reset it. And that's how you set up the first loop's range of motions. And as you can see from earlier, I've got a couple of vertices to sort out on this loop here. Go around and do this for every branch that you have. Now that we have done our starting edge loops, we can go back in and just do a bit more skinning, and then we should be ready to start animating. Once you've finished the skinning to do with the thickness of your chosen edge loop to begin your branch, you should get a nice kind of pinching effect like this when it gets scaled down. This will help later when you're mimicking a branch growing. Now before we start using the ridiculous power of the animation system, I'm going to explain a few controls that may likely be used. So the basic controllers used for this effect involve many controls we have already been using. The first one is select chain. This allows the user to select all nodes on a chain that are displayed when using a particular control. To demonstrate, I'll press an animation button, and then I'm going to press select chain, and now I'm just going to move it around. So now you can see I've selected the entire chain and it moves. This could be done with every single other node. This is also the same for select rig. If I go in and I press a control, which I've already done, and I select a control and press select rig, now everything can be moved around. For both of these controls, if you have no controller on, so I'm just going to press all modes off, if I select the base and do select rig, it will now select every single necessary control. The same goes for chain. If I select a chain component with all the modes off and press select chain, it will select every single controller on that chain. Delete keyframe. This allows the user to cleanly delete every key on your current Komotion selection. It is recommended that you use this when deleting keys in general. It allows for a precise and clean workflow when animating. So if I just go through the timeline and find an animation, I'm just going to go and select chain, and with these nodes selected I'm going to press delete key, and as you can see all the keys have been deleted. Every single animation to do with that particular node will have been deleted, and this goes for every other node. And this can be combined with select rig and select chain, so if you have your entire rig selected you can also delete everything. The reset button. This uses rig frozen state, which holds your rig default pose on every control node. So we've already used this button before, and that is freeze rig transforms. So I press freeze rig transforms, it comes up with a pop-up window that you can't see. I press yes, a warning message for no reason pops up. Well, it does, but it's irrelevant. And then it just allows you to be able to reset. So if I go to, I don't know, thickness, and I go to thickness, and I press reset, it'll just reset it back to its default state, which you saw on frame 0. The root control. This allows the user to move an entire chain around. If I press root and I select any part of the chain, it will take me to the root. You can also just select the root. Now it won't be apparent right now as to why I'd want to do this. However, it's quite important for growth. The thickness control is one of the more exciting features that allow users to animate bones non-uniformly while maintaining their orthogonal matrix. It allows models to grow when combined with part type models. So if I just grab a couple of these, I'm just gonna scale. So as you can see, you're scaling non-uniformly. And if I set the chain, and as a shortcut, I usually just do this, and you see now it is basically vanished. And you can set it to 0, but Maya doesn't allow you to do an absolute 0, so I just do 0.001 half the time, and then just press reset, and you're back to normal. IK and FK. This control is the most used control in the system. It gives access to exactly what the button is labelled as. Users can switch between IK and FK when either node type is selected on a chain, which speeds up workflow when required. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to press the IK and FK button. I'm currently in thickness. If I now set the geometry so that you don't have all these lines everywhere or edge loops, and I'm going to set the top controller of the IK-FK control system, I'm going to switch it to IK. So now you'll see it is now an IK, and you can also switch back. You can also switch to IK and FK with any other FK controller on your chain too as a shortcut. There has also been a guard built in, so if I'm currently in, say, free mode, which is where I can move stuff around randomly, if I then press IK, it will not switch to IK because there is a guard that stops the first IK and FK switch when you're moving from one controller system into the system, so that the user does not accidentally switch. On the second click, it will then allow you to switch. Let's take a look at some of the advanced controllers. Subcontrols are seen as advanced controllers by Komotion because you're animating with some of the hierarchy's deeper nodes. You also have to remember that you've animated them because there is of course more nodes that have been used rather than just basic ones. These are usually used to make primary animation deformations more beautiful by adding in secondary animation tweaks. Currently throughout this tutorial we've been using a node controller system that uses path objects. However, there is a more advanced version called path joints. Now, path joints, these have the functionality of path objects as well as the capability of moving bones inside the structure, which affect the ribbon and joint position on a chain. These can be used to create very extreme animations like making an arm turn into a knot. The controller spline knots are very similar to path joints. However, these are used to move entire controller chunks, and these may be used within the animation that we're doing in a minute. Now, let's start animating and see the power and speed of the Komotion control system by doing 3 very short and simple steps, which will produce a very basic growth animation. Firstly, I'm going to set my animation starting range on frame 1. It is best to never animate from frame 0. Frame 0 is best used for changes on frozen states if needed with the system later on for different rigs, or creating different rigs. Step 1. Activate the root controls and set a key on frame 1 for each branch. So we're going to go to root, and select each branch, and for my rig I'll be setting these to 0. I'll then go to my end frame, which will be 100, and I'm just going to reset them. Step 2. Activate your path or path joints. It doesn't really matter which. And again, select every branch, and this time also the stem, and we're going to select the chain. Another method of course could have been that I could have just selected the stem and select rig, and it would have selected all of them. Now I'm going to go back to frame 1. I'm going to set their percentages to 0. Now frame 100, I'm going to realign them. I'm just going to set a key to mark where I've realigned. Third and final step is activate thickness. So I'm just going to go and select controller, activate thickness, just because it's quicker than having everything selected and changing to thickness. I'm going to select rig, and I'm going to change their scale to 0. And on frame 100, I'm going to reset them. And congratulations, you should now have a very basic growing model. From here, it's your own preference on editing. You can change the path objects to different growth times by following this exact method by having them end at different times. It's best to have a mess around and to test out the other basic controls and advanced controls mentioned before for more beautiful animations. If you want a smoother look, just go in and turn all your controls off just so you can select this easy and press 3 and you get a nice much smoother looking growing tree. However, I'll be keeping it with this kind of more horrible jaggy look because next I'm going to be importing this into a game engine. Before you export, set your frames to 0. If this is your first export of the skeleton, you will need the T-pose of your entire model and your rig. If your rig does not look like the T-pose you originally started with, go on to frame 0, select the base of your rig, select your rig, and then press reset. And what it will do, it will just set it back to its T-pose, which is why the free state is so useful. If you end up not going back to this 0 frame, then you will end up with an example like this. However, if you already have a T-pose in your engine and you're able to sync up your animation range from here onto your skeleton, then by all means you are fine to export from frame 1. Now we've animated, skinned and set up everything we need, let's go to the export panel and open export. There are two types of export. For this particular export, I'll be using the save before export. It'll be easier for this video. Undo after export just means you have to press one of these buttons and then it just undoes everything that's just been exported, but you keep the export when you're prompted. So, to export this model with bones, select the model and select the rig base. I'm going to put save before export. And now, if I just wanted the structure on the model, I would just do export nodes. But because I want the structure and the animation on this particular export, I'm going to press export animation. In the industry, you just use them for different reasons. Same with these configuration options, it's just preference. Undo after export is a longer type of export, depending on how big your structure is and how long the animation timeline is. Save before export just means that you're just going to save before your export when you're prompted, and then it'll export and you just reload your scene. Because when you export, the entire operation destroys any control system that you have selected. So whether it's Komotion or advanced skeleton or anything like that, it will just literally destroy it, export everything cleanly, and then based on undo or save, you'll be able to reuse it again. I've got the base selected, I've got the model selected, right. Let's press export animation. Now I've saved it, it's now going to count through the timeline and bake these keys onto your structure. So when it comes to exporting in the actual export panel, you shouldn't have to press the bake option when it comes to an FBX. Alembic and other types of formats haven't been tested, but FBX has been tested for game engines. Once this is finished, it'll then prompt you, would you like to export? So now the export is finished, your rig control system will be completely wrecked, but nobody cares. Anyway, I'm going to switch to file type format, FBX. I'm then going to go into the edit preset. You can't see any of this because I've got the recording set to the actual Maya window, so none of this will be visible. I don't need bake animation, I just need animation ticked. Deform model, skins, blend shapes, just be safe. And that's pretty much it. And then export selection. Yep. And then make an export file. I'm going to call my one tree model. Let's just call it dumb because it's a dumb looking tree. Alright, dumb tree model export. I've done underscores because that's how Unreal Engine 4 likes to take it. It doesn't really matter with Unity half the time. So for this one I'm going to use Unreal Engine 4. By all means you can import into Unity. It should hopefully come up with constraints export failed, which is fine. If there's any other warnings, then something didn't go correctly. After doing the export, I really do recommend opening up the scene again just before you do anything else, just so that you don't accidentally save over it with a broken rig system. Also, you can continue working with it. Okay, so I'm in Unreal Engine 4. I'm just going to create a file and call it dumb tree. I'm going to import the tree. Scale to mesh, yes. Import mesh, yes. I just realised you guys can't see this window because it's focused on the Unreal Engine 4. Basically, I'm on the FPX import options. Import animations, yes. Animation length, yes. The exported time, which is the range of frame 1 to the end, for my case. Okay, so that should basically be it. So import all. And now, if you've done everything correctly, you should end up with something like this in your preview. And then from there you can start doing your game mechanics, adding your scripts, and whatever you like for your games on your consoles or your virtual reality, whatever else you choose to use it for.